So my name is Marju. Many of you probably know me, but who don't, I'm the advisor on museums at the Estonian Ministry of Culture. I've been on that position since 2010. And okay, we hear you, good. And also the previous Museums Act was my work, kind of. Like I'm the co-author of the previous act. And it was great to hear from Vaiva that you also had this kind of process recently. And I will concentrate on the definition part. And actually, we have kind of similar solution how to include the ICOM definition in our law. We started our process already in fall 2019 by consulting the museum workers directly about how the last Museums Act, which was, it came into force in 2013, which should be changed, what works, what doesn't. But then the Corona crisis came 2020, and so other activities were put on stop, and we restarted in the spring of 2022, so last spring. And the Parliament adopted the amendments in February this year, and it came into force on the 1st of May. We didn't want the 1st of April. And our solution about how to, and here is also the link to the English translation of the act. We didn't also want to have this kind of direct to that translation of the new ICOM definition because it's not a law material. And we decided that we include purpose of the act in this Museums Act. It didn't appear in the act before, and now we have the purpose of the act, which is more philosophical, more like a literature thing. And then we have a definition, which is not actually a definition per se, because it's more like a list of conditions to which you have to apply. The museum have to apply to these conditions if, in two cases, if it wants to apply for state funding or it wants to join the Estonian Museums information system. So otherwise, state doesn't say, can you name yourself a museum or not? It's up to you. It's only if the museum wants something from the state, then we assess this. And first, let me show you what is this new purpose of the new Museums Act. These are all new terms in our law. To create conditions for the development of sustainable, professional, and ethical museums. And so it continues. The first one is pretty obvious what museums have to do: strengthen the understanding of individuals and communities, understanding of culture, history, and environment. Next one is something that we took up from the Kyoto meeting, where where the definition was also in discussion, and we picked up from their critical thinking and memory and identity, and we thought that it's not right to leave it out. Third one, we want to stress that it's not the whole purpose wants to stress it's not only about the current people, current clients who go to museums, or not only the future generations, but both. So museums have a very complicated task to fulfill the needs of the current generations and the future ones. Then New terms also included are community and diversity, which were not in the law before. Then create new knowledge and inspire. And number 6 is also inspired from the Kyoto version, to promote education, well-being, equal opportunities, and democracy. And number 7 is very ambitious also, that museums should take into account the needs of the users throughout their lifespan, which means from babies to elderly people. In the between, there are people with disabilities, but not only. For example, parents have different needs. You could be in the wheelchair only temporarily because you just broke your leg or something like that. So the diversity of users are in focus. So one may ask that, what does it give if it's only this, like a purpose of the law? But actually, we kind of included these ideas also in the, like Vaiva said, in the specific paragraphs also. And also not only in the law, but the ministry regulations that come after the law, for example, for financing, this is very much taken into consideration. And then this definition part, which is not the definition, but the list of conditions. As I said, our act doesn't say it who can name itself a museum. And neither did the previous law, actually. And it's not the aim of the law to regulate it, because we share the understanding that the state should intervene into the people's or museums' life only as little as needed. And there is no need to regulate this. There is no register of museums in Estonia. What I noticed from Vaiva's presentation is that we used to have this notification process about the new museums or closing them down, but we have made our law more simple and less bureaucratic, and we took it out actually, because if you establish a new museum in the like this, there is another register not for museums but for all. For every kind of economic entity that wants to do something. Here, it has to choose what kind of activities it does. So from there, we actually can get the information if we haven't read this from newspaper or seen from TV. But Estonia is pretty small, so pretty much we still know if there is something new. And we don't have any accreditation program. We didn't have before. We don't have it now. And as I said, in 2 cases we assess this compliance with the Museum Act if they want something from the state, because the MUIS, this Museum Information System, this is the museum can use them for free, but our aim is to kind of why we don't take other institutions who doesn't comply to the conditions is because we want to have kind of how to say like a professional level of this system. So that's why there we assess it. But if you compare our old act, the old museum definition, this is pretty much word by word the old ICOM definition, but not exactly. For example, the last sentence was added in 2013, that here the children and disabled persons were mentioned here, but well, I was the author then, but of course I didn't invent this. There were interest groups who said that this should be in the law, but actually now I can question why only children and disabled persons, because there are also other groups who need special attention. Oops, sorry. And here are this is the list of conditions, or you can name it also museum definition if you want to. It's just split down to like bullets. The first one is inspired actually from the Netherlands, because, as I said, our starting point is financing museums and joining the museum information system. So that's why our focus here is so much on the collection. Because, for example, I don't know, theme parks or exhibition centers, some of them also use the name of the museum, and they can do that. There is no problem. But if you have a collection and you have a obligation to the society to have to ensure the long-term preservation of that. It's another level of costs. So that's why you are entitled to the state funding, and that's why is also this kind of list so much inclined to the collection side. So the first one is you must have a collection. This goes specifically for several private museums, which sometimes is like founded by a private person who owns the stuff, but there is no contract between this museum, and we saw that it's not a good solution. That at least they should have, for half of them, it should covered by a contract. Or that museum is using this private person's collection. Then the second one is about collecting, but stress is on the word purposefully. So it's not just bringing all stuff together and putting on display, but purposefully. And also you have to keep records. That was also in the definition before. We have here we're mentioning here the International Documentation Principles of Museums, which is actually a CIDOC document, which is a very basis of the museum record keeping. Then we stress that it should be long-term preservation. Before it was just preservation, which is discussable, which is long-term, which is not. Then point number 5, that collection is available to those interested. So that means that also this part of the collection, which is not displayed on the exhibitions or permanent exhibition, should be available. Of course, not just walking into the storage, but by appointment is okay, or just giving information about that. This is the point of that. And then number 6 is this bullet was very carefully worded. There is no random word or no random or and. So who conduct studies or research. So in Estonian, well, it's pretty much a direct translation, I would say, but studies is more soft, and research is more like scientific research. But here we want to stress that this is like the minimum level to enter for consideration for state funding or for museum information system. So of course there are the big museums like Estonian National Museum or Art Museum. They do like scientific research, but for smaller museums, studies related to the museum collection, for example, it's just if you collect and describe them and keep records, this is already in the this kind of requirement is already fulfilled, then you have made studies related to the museum collection. And if you make exhibitions about your collections, of course, this also requires studies. Then another half is that you regularly present its results of these studies or research to the public. And we have 3 kind of activities that are mandatory. You should have exhibitions. It doesn't matter if they are permanent or temporary. There are different models. Museums operate in different ways. Then you must have some kind of educational activities or events. We don't prescribe which kind of activities or events, but for example, the most simple one is like a guided tour, which also is then for smaller museums, then it's covered. And then you should have scientific or popular science publications. And the last point, we made a little bit rewording. We used to have, you see, this non-profit, but to stress that it's okay to make money, but you shouldn't distribute your profit, but you should invest in this back to the museum main activities. So as you can see, we have kept this meaning part of the definition quite minimal. The functions are still there, and the values are mostly in the this purpose of the act part. And I don't go into details because with other changes that we made in the law, because it would go very long. Because our main goal was not to change the definition. It came later. We started from 2 main points. First was the financing model, which is changed now. We used to have all museum funding together in one bucket, but now we will have 2 buckets. One is for state museums and state foundations, or these who use state collections. And then the other one is for municipal and private and university museums. And another point why we changed the law is we made the deaccession of collections much easier. We don't have anymore this kind of requirement that the minister is signing the acts to deaccession of collections, but the museum director has the right. And also it's more flexible what museum can do with the objects that are which are left the collections. These are 2 main things. And also the museum director contract thing was changed, similar to Lithuania, but we don't regulate the municipal museums in that respect at all. It's for them to decide how they do. Before, we had this 5-year contract requirement only for state museums, but state foundations didn't have this requirement in their law. But most of them, usually, they had public competitions for museum leaders, but now it's a requirement. And both state museums and state foundations, for both, it's allowed to have you can have the same person one time to prolong this 5 years contract. But if the same person after that wants to compete at a competition, she or he can do that as well. So without a competition, you can change the contract one time. So that's all from me now. The problem is that I cannot hear you. So if if you have questions, I don't know how we manage that. Or I just mute my microphone, maybe then it would.
So, hello? Okay, it doesn't function.
Cannot hear you.
Hello? Yes. So unfortunately, we are not able to ask questions directly to Marju because she can't hear us, but we can do it in written form, probably. Now she can hear us. Oh, great news. Sorry, we are all learning this. So now probably Vaiva, could you also stand up and we can question you both, because what we just listened to, these are actually totally different attitudes to the legal framework of museums, and one could be considered probably as over-regulated and another as really free, and one could ask why they need law on museums in Estonia at all. But of course I'm exaggerating and thank you indeed for introducing us in those developments. I would say in Latvia we are at the moment somewhere in the middle. Zana Greenwald knows the recent developments. Actually in Latvia we are also working on amendments to the existing law on museums. But actually connected to some scandals in this museum, which made us to do so and ask different questions, and then those issues of the new museum definition came also on the surface of the discussion, and now those amendments or suggestions for the amendments are elaborated at the Latvian Museum Association, and the working group is working closely with the Latvian Museum Board, and I think it will continue for several months, and then we will see what happens, if we can learn from our Baltic colleagues, and what will happen with our law on museums. Do you have questions to our last two speakers in the audience? Jānis Garjans has a lot of questions. I see already like a bubble of questions.
Yes, thank you, Vaiva, and thank you, Marju. It was very interesting to hear about new steps. And coming back what Una said, my question for both of you are connected with these recent events in Latvia. Why our museum community wanted some changes in our museum law, because there was some disagreements, if you want, scandals between museums and their founders or owners of the museum. And then museum community felt like unprotected, no means how to protect this professional view. And then they started to look on our museum law and look for some support, some answers, and nothing was in our museum law. If such situation in Lithuania or Estonia, does museum law in your countries can help to protect this professional position I hope that I put question understandable, or if not, Una, please help me.
I suppose I understood the question because I a little bit know about the situation that it's in this center and another museum municipality. In Lithuania, in the case of Lithuanian law of museums, we have no such a situation because the Ministry of Culture, which is an owner of the national and state museums, we do not influence any content of museums. We do not made any suggestions or enforce museum directors to make any otherwise or other exhibitions or educational. It's like we understand this like a censorship. So I never did this, and I hope we will never do this in the, I don't know, not nearest in the future at all. In the municipality, it's quite complicated because in Lithuania we have local government's law, and for the municipality, culture function is independent function. So we can't influence, for example, establishment, maintenance, appointment of head of a museum, any other aspects of a museum management, God bless, and of a museum management, except that it is set in the law of the museums that the Ministry of Culture forms and implements the museum policy. So the main regulations like the law of the museums, the museum collection management guidelines, they are obligatory. Appointment of the heads of the directors are obligatory because they are set in the law of museums. But the particular protection, for example, how Ministry of Culture should be or could be involved in the solving such a situations, there is no particular set, but as far as I know, we haven't faced yet such a situations in the municipality museums. The biggest issue was about the heads of the museums and about the competitions. Because sometimes community complains that these, all the competitions are not very transparency and etc. But it's, as it's shown in now previous and this year competitions, the changes are qualitative, not in a better way happening. And I don't know how we could do anything and set something in the law of the museums in order to protect the profession. Because there is, I don't know, maybe Marju can say something more about or something different. But now in Lithuania, we not have any tools in the law of the museum especially set for the protection of it.
I have to agree with Vaiva that we also don't have this kind of tools or instruments in the law, and I think there shouldn't be this kind of things either. And as regards the municipal museums, we don't regulate them at all unless they join the museum information system and then collection related. But these are mostly technical questions, or how to keep records and this kind of things are regulated. And about I'm not really familiar with this Latvian case, but I can imagine from your comments what's it about. But also the content of museums is not regulated or intervened by the state. And actually the process, how Estonian Museums Act has reached the current status, it hasn't been very straightforward and very quick process, because the first Museums Act from 1996 was much more regulative, and then it take several years to make it less bureaucratic. And I still think that we are not there yet to cancel the Museums Act totally, but I don't see there any like a catastrophe coming if that will eventually happen, because there are so many states in the world who doesn't have the Museums Act, and they still have wonderful museums.
Thank you, Marju. Another question from Lithuania.
I would like to give a comment, not a question. I am a director of the National Museum of Lithuania, and I can only agree with what Vaiva said about Minister of Culture not interfering. But I want to comment on the whole process of a Museum Act. Vaiva was very polite, telling that it took only 1 year. But actually, to be honest, it took several years in advance to prepare that it took only 1 year to pass an act. And we had a group, a working group at actually a parliament, not parliament, but President Palace of Lithuania. And we had we discussed for 1.5 years, and we had what was called guidelines of the Museum Act, to the Museum Act. Why was it needed? Because before that, we had some directors of the museums being for 45 years, 30 years, and so on. And actually, our Museum Act was so old-fashioned. I mean, everything what you told today in the morning, it wasn't there. So we really had to do a very big jump, and also had the whole, community with us. So it took some time for the discussions. And I also want to explain why we have this very harsh regulation on the museum directors, why museum directors of the national museums, we can apply only twice. It's because of this very, not change at all. So I think it's a kind of a period we are going through in Lithuania, and I guess the next time they will have a museum law, change on museum law, it will be more democratic or more liberal, but it's just a story. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your comment, Ruta. And probably, no, there was no question. Probably we have some questions online. No, our online observers, no, everybody lost interest at these tough issues, but somebody has to do this job. It's really boring and time demanding, but somebody, if we started with those regulations, they have to be improved and renewed from time to time, and these developments are in all our countries, as we see. And what I liked that also these descriptions of different museum professions are included, and so we can observe how the professions inside the museum are changing, and they are mentioned there. And no, if nobody questions, then I can ask.
I just have one remark, a very short observation of experience of law of museums. After we finished and the law entered into the force, I personally and my colleagues understood that everybody in Lithuania knows everything about museums except us.
Yes, this is also true story. But if I understand right, then in my care about Latvian museum law, we have still very hard definition in which legal forms museums can be established. And if I understand right, then for Estonia and Lithuania, you haven't defined this, which legal entities.
Just legal entity.
Yeah, just legal entity without prescribing what it is. Hello.
It's not for the purpose to regulate that what can be there, but we just describe different legal forms because they have different requirements sometimes. So that's why we need that. For example, state museums and state foundations. That's why we have but we, for example, for private museums, any kind of entity would be that.
Yes. Pardon, I have to learn this. I can't speak very quickly after she has finished. So next time I will know this. Yes, it was an answer to my question. Thank you. So we don't have any questions. We can discuss during the next week a lot about museum regulations and laws. We have this feeding now, and we have become it from our colleagues from the ministries. Thank you so much.